Wow, this essay on the rights of peoples is, it's dense. You weren't kidding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready for the challenge, though. How about you? Think we could dive into this together?
Oh, absolutely. I'm ready when you are.
Okay, so we're starting with this group. They call themselves G.R.E.C.E.
Right.
They're French intellectuals. And this essay, it comes from their 15th annual colloquium back in 1981.
Yeah.
15 years. Can you imagine 15 years of these intense discussions all leading up to this?
Really shows a dedication to these ideas, yeah.
It really does. And in 81, their big focus, it was a declaration of the rights of peoples. So right away, they're pushing us beyond just thinking about individual rights.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the rights of entire groups of people. But then that begs the question, what even makes a people in the first place?
Right, and they really dig into that. What's fascinating is how they're challenging like centuries of thought that puts the individual first and foremost.
Yeah.
They're saying, hold on, individuals don't exist in a vacuum. Who we are is deeply connected to the larger the people we belong to.
And they weren't the first to kind of sound this alarm, right?
Yeah.
I know you mentioned some other thinkers who had similar concerns about this intense focus on the individual.
Absolutely. You go all the way back to Montesquieu in the 18th century. He was worried about these like overly simplistic ideas, one size fits all,
Right.
that they paved the way for tyranny because they ignored the nuances of different cultures, different societies.
So instead of celebrating what makes each group unique, it's more like trying to force everyone into the same mold.
Exactly. And then you have Justus Moser, also 18th century, who said these blanket laws, they actually stifle freedom
Okay.
because they don't account for like the richness of diversity. It's like trying to apply the same rules to a rainforest as you would to a desert. It just doesn't work.
Makes sense.
And then a bit later, you have Friedrich Schlegel, who was very much against anything absolute, anything that dismissed the individual parts that make up a whole. He actually called it the enemy of humanity, this rigid, absolute way of thinking.
So we're already seeing a pattern here, right? I mean, these thinkers, even before G.R.E.C.E., they were warning against these universalizing systems. Like, something crucial was being lost when you prioritize the individual over the group, over the shared culture and history.
Yeah, and that's exactly what makes this essay so intriguing. It's not just critiquing the past, they're proposing a different way of thinking about rights and freedoms, one that starts by recognizing the vital role of a people. And they don't just like throw out the term a people, they get really specific about what they mean.
Yeah, they weren't content with those, like, surface-level markers of just sharing a language or living in the same place.
Right, exactly.
So how'd they define it? What actually makes a people in their view?
Okay, so they point to three key elements. First, you've got shared history, but, and this is important, it's not just like a list of dates and battles. It's about how a people remembers those events, their collective memory.
It's those stories they pass down,
Yeah.
right? The ones that really shape how they see themselves.
Yes, it becomes part of their DNA almost. Okay, and then the second element, inherited culture. This is about traditions, values, the art forms, all the things that give a people their unique flavor.
It's the spice of life, the thing that makes each culture distinct.
I like that, the spice of life. And then they add this other really interesting piece, a collective destiny.
Okay?
This sense that their futures are tied together, that they're moving forward as a unit.
So it's not just the past, but where they're going together, like almost like a family, right? I mean, you share a history, common values, that sense that you're in it together.
Such a good analogy. And it gets at the core of what they're saying, which is that a people, it's more like a living organism than just a collection of individuals. It has its own unique properties, its own spirit, and this is key, its own rights.
So the kind of flip in the script on how we usually think about things, putting the focus on the group.
Totally. They say we're not born as these blank slates. We're shaped by our cultures, all those inherited traditions, those collective memories.
Right.
We don't just exist as these isolated beings. We become individuals through our relationships, through those shared experiences within our culture.
So it's not that they're dismissing individual identity. They're saying it's intertwined with this larger collective one.
Exactly.
And all of this focus on the community, it sets the stage for how they view culture.
Totally. They see culture as like the lifeblood of a people, the source of their strength, and they have a pretty stark warning about what happens when a culture's under threat.
This is where their view on culture, it really resonated with me. They say, and I'm quoting here, culture is the identity card of a people.
Yeah.
It's such a powerful image.
It is.
Because it's saying culture It's not just like, customs and rituals.
Right.
It's the lens through which a people see the world.
It's how they process information, how they make sense of their history, how they imagine their future. Yeah.
It's like their North Star,
Exactly.
guiding them as a collective.
And that's where the essay takes this really interesting turn because they argue that assimilation, that pressure to conform to a dominant culture,
Right?
that's actually a form of colonization.
Wow.
Because when you erase a people's culture, you erase their identity.
Yeah. You're taking away their voice, their own unique way of being in the world. It makes you think, like, were there ever times, maybe even subtly, where you felt that pressure
Yeah.
to kind of fit in, even if it meant downplaying your own background, your traditions?
Oh, absolutely. It's a subtle pressure, but a lot of people feel it. And what's interesting is the essay points out that this cultural colonization, it can happen even without traditional political control.
Right, right.
So we've been talking about how culture shapes identity, but they take it a step further and say that true decolonization, it goes beyond just the political.
It's got to be economic, cultural, even ideological.
Exactly. They highlight how economic globalization, with things like massive corporations and global markets,
Yeah.
that can be its own subtle form of colonization.
It's like when I was in, I think I was traveling in place a while back, and I remember seeing this huge, I think it was a global brand store, same logo, same products, everything. And it really struck me, it felt like this wave of like cultural homogenization.
Yes.
And it wasn't even like a political border being crossed. It was just, there it was.
You've hit on it. That's
Yeah.
exactly the kind of thing they're talking about. And this is where G.R.E.C.E. introduces this idea of a new enemy, and they call it the system.
The system.
Yeah, and it's not a specific government or ideology, but this more insidious force. This force that wants to make everything the same.
And it's interesting, they were writing this back in '81, but it feels so relevant today, like almost prophetic in a way. So how do they define this system? What are its characteristics?
Okay, so they describe it as driven by this blind faith in things like progress, technology, the free market, and it pushes this idea of a single universal good.
Okay.
Like one right way of living, of thinking, even of consuming. It's like this global one-size-fits-all approach that just like bulldozes over cultural differences.
And they tie this to Christopher Lash's idea of the culture of narcissism,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah.
this idea that by focusing so much on the individual, we actually become more susceptible to manipulation. We're so caught up in our own little worlds, our own bubbles,
Yeah.
that we miss the bigger picture. We're disconnected from those deeper cultural roots that could actually give us strength.
And a sense of shared purpose, right?
Yes. And it makes you wonder, is there any way to fight back? And this is what I found to be the most powerful part of the whole essay. It's almost like this unspoken question. How do you preserve your own cultural identity, those traditions, the values, the stories, in a world that's constantly pushing for conformity?
It's a question, isn't it? It's something we all have to grapple with. And they seem to argue that it takes a conscious effort. We have to hold on to those roots, resist that pull to just conform to a single global culture.
And to remember, as they so powerfully argued, a people's right to self-determination, it's deeply connected to their right, to their culture,
Yes.
to their own unique expression. It's about recognizing those threads of shared history, of tradition, of destiny, all those things that tie us to something larger than ourselves.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. So where do you come down on this? Are we headed for this homogenous global culture, or is there hope? Can we hold on to those individual cultural identities?
I don't know. It's a tough one, right? It's the question. G.R.E.C.E's essay, I mean, it doesn't give us easy answers, I will say that, but it gives us a really powerful framework for understanding just what's at stake in this struggle between globalization and cultural identity. It's a conversation that needs to continue, and hopefully this deep dive has given our listeners, something to chew on.
That's the mark of, it's a truly great essay. It stays with you. It makes you ask questions, maybe see things a bit differently. So thank you. Thank you for diving into these deep waters with me. It's been a journey.